Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world and we talk to people who are making it happen and we get their stories. And if you could like and subscribe, it makes producer James super happy. Today's guest in the Sky Lounge, Niral Shah. Hi, Niral.
Thank you for having me, Todd. We've gotten a chance to meet up in various meetings and happy hours, but it's always fun to see you and interact with you, this time virtually.
Very excited to spend a little time with you. So, Niral, who are you and what are you working on?
Great. So I'm a physician entrepreneur. I've had a couple of startups. I am a trauma surgeon by trade. Now, I am going to put a little asterisk on the physician entrepreneur. Which one comes first depends on the day that you may see me. And more importantly, over the last 25 years of my career, shall we say.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've had a really cool arc through your career, as most people on the Sky Lounge here have. Let's talk about like your early career. How'd you get started? And maybe bonus points for talking about your mother.
Perfect. So, I actually have a very circuitous background. I started med school when I was 19. I'd always had a keen interest in entrepreneurship. I come from a business family background. I was a micro entrepreneur as a child. Always had that thirst of thinking about things a little bit differently. But I loved biology. I loved life sciences. I liked the aspects of healthcare with the betterment of society. And so I went to medical school pretty early on. I then decided to take a sabbatical to do my own startup, much to the chagrin of my Indian mother. With
Yeah.
my friends and I had an idea for a search engine. If you'll remember at that time, search engines were governed just by keywords. So my mother had breast cancer. If you looked up things for breast cancer, often pornography pages showed up, and we were like, hey, there has to be a better way. And so we started working on it. We moved out to Silicon Valley, ultimately got hooked up with an incubator, got some funding, did a reverse takeover, and I know we're going to go into that a little bit more. But I took some time back and I said, hey, you know what? What still drives me? I went back to medical school. I love surgery. I became a trauma surgeon. And then in 2018, I realized, hey, healthcare is really going to have a reckoning. And it's better for me to get a seat at that table, especially because I can speak both languages. And more importantly, thinking about how can I make an impact and, as Steve Jobs would say, make a dent in the universe. And that was sort of drove me to go back to business school. And since then, I've been helping life science companies, startups, and my favorite role is an ad hoc entrepreneur in residence.
Wow. Yeah. Very cool. Well, let's kind of pick that apart. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
heck of an arc. So you're born entrepreneur, like a lot of people. So on the show, not like a lot of people,
sure.
but like, what was your like? Like I babysat people's pets when they went on vacation. That was probably my first gainful employment from somebody else. What was yours? What was your first kind of scrappy job when you
My
were a
first
kid?
scrappy job actually was in fourth and fifth grade. I would lend out pencils, to
Okay.
people that would forget their pencils for maybe 5 cents or 10 cents or something like that. And that it was a rental business, right? At some basic level.
Okay.
And then, we could sell little things like candy if I had some or whatever. And so those were the first tidbits of entrepreneurism. Then I worked at my father's convenience stores. We had three, and so I worked at all three. And you do when you're down in the trenches like that. Sometimes you learn about human factors and things like that. And so that was all the way through high school, and I ended up working at a Blimpies and all sorts of things, even during medical school. And so
Okay.
those were my first sets. I will gladly concede that when we started the company, I had no formal founder experience or anything like that. And I think there's some real advantages to that.
Well, okay, so slow down for a second. So we skipped college there. So you went from high school to
Yeah.
like medical school. How did
So
like is that like a Doogie Howser kind of thing?
No, I was in a direct medical program
Okay.
where I had a slot in the medical school. I had a lot of credits coming in from both AP classes in high school as well as Harvard summer school and various schools that I'd gone to around our area.
Oh,
So I had
wow.
a lot of credits going in.
Okay.
And then I looked at it and it's like, well, actually, I'm just going to need to start, you know?
Okay. So you told your mom, hey, good news. I'm in med school. You
Yeah.
start med school. And then you said, at what point did you guys move to Silicon Valley? Before or after the?
So in the halfway through my second year, so I started medical school in 1998. Around 1999, 2000 is when really the dot-com boom was taking hold. More importantly, you probably had some foundational changes that were occurring. You know, you had search engines being democratized, whether it was via Alta Vista. And if you'll remember, this is well before the times of Google. Most people talk about their internet age being what search engine did you start off using it really well. And mine was Alta Vista, so I was in the age of Alta Vista, by the way.
Okay. Okay. And then what was the name of your search engine? Is this something we would have heard of?
So you would not have heard of it. We did not really make it out of the starting blocks, you know, full on. We had done some things, and it really took a step back to think about what exactly our value proposition was. We started off as a company called NetGopher, right?
Gopher hole.
Yes, and if
Okay.
you remember, Gopher was actually one of the first sets of software that was used to mine, you know, emails and
Yeah. Yeah.
forums and things like that. And so that's where it came.
Yeah. Like academic papers and that kind of thing. Before there was
Exactly.
HTML, you had to
Yeah.
do Gopher hole.
hmm
Okay. Okay. And then so you did this in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom. Like, what a great time to be alive.
And you know, I will also say it was probably at the tail end of it before a liquidity crunch in the 2001 2002 crisis. But
Hmm.
there were so many transitional things happening that you almost need to be in the eye of the storm in order for things to occur. Silicon Valley was where it's at. It often is still now. And so we decided to get up and move and go there.
Wow. Okay. So now you're in Silicon Valley. You got a search engine startup, which is hot stuff, right? And then did you fall into an incubator of some sort, or
Yeah.
did you get some help along the way, or what
So
would that look like?
let me actually slow it down for a lot of your listeners because I think there are a couple of good takeaways. One, when you first start somewhere, it's not like everyone is beating the door down to your office. It's almost like you're actually going and making very small, deliberate steps in order to get something forward. And many times you're just kind of sitting there like, well, what did I accomplish today? And sometimes there's really not a whole lot to do. Um, During that time, you start to recognize, hey, there's a lot of potential loss. Two of the co-founders actually left. Both went back to medical school, and I'm the last man standing.
Hmm.
Stands alone, right?
Oh, wow.
And many times you have those doubts, like, hey, am I even like, what if this doesn't work? I mean, I'm leaving a great paying job, all these other things. But I had gotten hooked into a meeting with an incubator that was affiliated with NASA Ames,
Okay.
and um, from there on, that was sort of that inflection point.
Wow. Okay. So you're in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom working
A
with
scrappy
NASA.
21-year-old, you know, trying to make, you know, something happen. So trying to rub two sticks together, make fire.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't really know. Clearly not a software guy or anything like that, but I'd like to think cogent, articulate, these other things. And sometimes you just are beating your head against a wall. But
That
I
is
was there.
awesome.
Then I got
Yeah.
presented to this incubator, the Enterprise Network. And that was probably the watershed moment where the director, his name was Gopal, I came in to do my interview and say, hey, I'd love to be a portfolio company. Here's what we're thinking about doing. This is what we're looking at. And we had gone through, did the tour, looked at a few things. And he said, oh, by the way, we have two companies presenting to Nokia Ventures. Why don't we just sit in on it so that you can see it? We sit down. I listened to their presentations. At the end of the second one, Gopal stands up and says, "We have one more treat for you. We have another new portfolio company, and he's not
I
given."
guess I guess you passed.
Yeah, and later on, he told me that he
Yeah.
knew we were in. They were going to take a stake in the company, so it was fait accompli from their standpoint. But what he wanted me to do was I had to present, not knowing that I was going to present to Nokia Ventures, which at that
Oh,
time in 2000, Nokia was a big deal. Like that
oh
was
yeah.
the 800-pound gorilla
During the telecom boom, right?
in the
And
telecom
yeah.
boom, and this is well before mobile as we know it today and so on. And my aim was to pitch without a deck, without being told, and preparing for who I was going to pitch to. And I realized right then that sometimes you need to be able to see bigger. And the reason I say that is because I didn't have those crutches of the slide deck, I was able to think about, hey, what's going to resonate with my audience? What may resonate? And so I started talking about how improved search engine, getting users to the right page in a mobile world was going to be a right thing. Before that, I hadn't even thought about mobile. It was all desktop, all, trying to figure out what the hyperlinks were going to do, all sorts of other things like that. And so Gopal made a fantastic point, which is I wanted to see what you were going to be able to do without having crutches that you put yourself in.
That's awesome. Wow. And so did they invest or did you get money
Yeah.
or
So we
no
had a
way?
few other meetings. They invested via the incubator, and so it's I guess.
So how did that work? So explain that. Like I've been looking at a lot of different incubators and ways to get stuff started. What kind of deal did they give you, or what was the structure of that particular? Like you apply to be a part of this thing,
Right.
and they give you a little
So
bit of money, or
it,
how does it?
so what mostly you got were the infrastructure standpoints. Again, at that time, a T1 line was like the greatest thing that had ever happened in life. So you got access to internet, you got access to different, just sort of overhead things. You got access to in-kind services. Remember, freedom to operate, legal are things that founders, especially technical founders, don't think about. We had access to a CFO that, kind of helped you run the books. All these other things that technical founders often don't think about. And so we had that, and they took a $25,000 stake, and they were getting them. So the enterprise network itself got money from various institutions, and their core edict was to create an engine in Silicon Valley.
And then, so did you have to pay for this, like the fractional CFO or the
Nope,
controller or anything?
it's all
Just
in-kind services, and so they took, equity in the. That you gave equity to the incubator, and in return, you got in-kind services and services. Quite frankly, that we wouldn't have been able to afford. So, for example, Wilson Sonsini, which is a well-known legal firm in Silicon Valley, was our initial
wow.
legal team, right? They
Yeah.
wouldn't have taken us on. I wouldn't have been able to get through that door without saying, "Oh, I'm a portfolio company of, and here's
I
what's happening."
yeah. Wow, that's really cool. And then you remember what percentage they took back then, or
Yeah, it was 4%.
four? Like that's a screaming deal.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, again, at that time, um, most people didn't understand how to make it all work out, like the economics of it. You're still getting the Amazons. You still had the, oddball valuations with pets.com, Webvan, broadcast.com. And so you did have some overhyping, quite frankly. And sometimes history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes, and we may be getting a little bit of that now. And so it was 4%.
Well, okay, you said my favorite phrase, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, and we're getting some of that now, right? So, compare and contrast back then, which was pretty frothy in retrospect, with kind of what we're seeing today? Like, what do you see today that kind of gets you going, hey, wait a second, I've seen this movie, or at least the prequel,
Yeah,
right?
I saw something just like it. This happens to be a dubbed version. And there are things where everything moves in one direction, where the pendulum swings. So, for example, at that time, everyone was talking about .com, and things and metrics that were well known. For example, it wasn't price to earnings, it was called price to eyeballs. Was
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that. That
Yeah,
was
yeah.
a thing. And that was being written about in Business Week or Market Watch or all these things, right? And that's just ridiculous looking back at it. You have, really, really big legacy companies trying to just get on this AI movement. And I will say, even I'm going to take AI out of it, there were probably 3 or 4 smaller blips along the way. So there was a time when in 2004, 2005, everything was like peer to peer, right? This is the Napster, everything like that, and everything turned peer to peer. Then everything turned like blockchain for a little bit, like Web 2.0, 3.0, and NFTs and like all these other things, right? When things get out of hand and everybody is trying to clamor in, then it's a trade that probably is too crowded and you're going to see a reversion to the mean. And so I do see elements from the AI. So I do think it's a foundational technology change, just like, you know, you have streaming, but broadcast.com should not have gone for $5.3 billion in 2000 like it did.
Right.
And so, yes, the underlying and the underpinnings are there. However, there needs to be some clear moderation in what can be done. And people are asking for things that are pie in the sky and that clearly aren't deliverable.
Yeah. Well, and then, we're seeing an explosion in capabilities, but we're also seeing a gap in reality and a gap in absorption, right? So those are two kind of interesting dynamics.
Mhm.
We'll see how that all plays out.
And it
People,
gets saturated. Once there's too much saturation, there's no more absorption left. And I think we may be past that point a little bit.
hmm. Well, how does, so if we history rewind, into the .com era, much stuff crashed. There was reasons that had something to do with somebody that nobody understood in the
Sure.
banking system or something. And it kind of all went down, and a bunch of stuff, the way they call it, the tide goes out, you figure out who's swimming naked.
That's right.
It's a lot of naked swimmers, but
Yeah.
but there are solid businesses that emerged from that are, big names today still, right? So consolidation, standardization, a couple big winners. Is that what we expect to come out of
I
this?
would
And then,
argue certain business models will have taken hold. So Webvan is one example that comes to mind, right? They were doing grocery delivery, which just didn't work based on the infrastructure that was there. But now you have everything that's being delivered to your home, potentially within an hour, depending on your region, right? They are Webvan 2 or 3.0. So even I would argue businesses that didn't succeed, some of their business models were probably just a bit too early. They didn't think it through well. And it wasn't an iterative, stepwise process, but rather they just jumped right in and, realized, hey, there's no water in the pool after they were midair.
but then we see, the people figure it out, and it takes a while, right? And then so the rise of Amazon
Yeah.
wasn't really a part of the Amazon Compute wasn't a part of the .com. I mean, maybe the books might have been, but at some point, decades later, overnight success. Like
Yeah.
here we are, they're delivering half the stuff that comes to your house. They figured it out, and then now there's not, you know, Kmart and Sears and like all these old, all the malls are, rotting, and it's just a different world. So, so kind of transposing that, like, is how do we think about what's going to succeed, what's going to fail? What are you looking for as emerging technologies? That if we apply that to the AI wave, a lot of things are going to get washed out that are silly. A lot of stuff that's important is going to persist, and then what is that going to do? A decade from now,
So I'm going to put my investor hat on, and I'm going to talk specifically within healthcare because that's the
Yeah,
life that I come from.
absolutely.
Um, One, I think people have misunderstood, you know, the essence of economies of scale. So, for example, you see a tremendous number of wrappers around ChatGPT, whichever model that you have. Um, that's going to be a linear cost basis, right? There's a certain amount of compute power, some at some basic level, a certain number of electrons that are going to be required for that uh, question or query. No matter how many customers you have, you're never going to reach economies of scale. And so that's a fundamentally winningless strategy and business model if you can't even think that through. So even within healthcare, healthcare is the second largest sector by GDP. It's growing well past inflation. And more importantly, if you look at the US healthcare sector, it comprises 18 to 21% of our GDP, depending on what you include in there. The next OECD country is clocking in at about 10%. We have no better outcomes. We have a lifespan that's about equivalent to Albania. We have
Oh man.
a human development index that's lower than that of Chile. At some point, there's going to be a reversion to the mean when you're so far off the curve. I bring that up because people are trying to throw money at a problem that can't be done, and wrappers or little things. By just putting .ai at the end of your name, all of a sudden
Yeah,
isn't going to
don't
do
do that.
anything.
Yeah.
People aren't thinking about the workflows. People aren't thinking about it. And you may end up, especially in healthcare, certain areas within life, like, the legal system or healthcare, you can't have hallucinations and incorrect answers. Like, that's going to cause some real detriment. And so you can't be at the 2 standard deviation mark. You probably need to be right 3 to 4 standard deviation.
Right. Yeah. So, I do think we're gonna figure a lot of that stuff out. I think there's gonna be ever increasing compute costs, which kind of scares me a little bit. Something's we gotta have the George Moore of this generation,
Yeah.
Moore's law,
Yeah.
everything from Intel doubles every 18 months.
18 months.
But we got to have like a cost. Something's got to happen where we got to have some more breakthroughs to make this stuff cheaper or more efficient. I don't know what that is yet, but I'm sure somebody's out there working on it.
Yeah. And we don't really know, but I think there are probably pattern recognition thing, clearly AI, whether you look at it from machine learning, generative AI, what have you, they're finding things that humans weren't able to do, probably because of our own cognitive biases and things like that. So there's probably value in that. But as you know, it also is beholden to hallucinations, which are going to be really, really problematic.
Well, like in medicine, I like the idea of ground. I think there's new systems. You don't just kind of say, "Hey, go make up whatever crap." I think you have to ground it in reality and there's ways to do that now with RAG or MCP or a variety of things where you can do the heavy lift of the research
Yeah,
from a known universe, like all of PubMed, for example, or something, and then say, here's all the scholarly articles that I could find that I think might be relevant. And there's probably 3 or 4 really good ones in there, and there might be 1 or 2 that are not. It's so great, and it kind of came in because of some
sure.
weird,
And
phrase in there, but
again,
that's
sometimes
useful.
those patterns are useful, but I do think in a lot of ways, especially when I'm taking care of patients, so I still like being boots on the ground. Do not consider myself an armchair general. I like getting back into the clinical world, so I spend about 3 to 5 days a month helping, friends that need, someone to kind of help cover or whatever. And I do enjoy that part of it. Um, I will say what I have used it for is I can see the pattern, but how is my patient different from the pattern being recognized by AI potentially? Or is this going to be trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, and that's going to be a different problem. And so I can be that sort of checkpoint.
Well, certainly you want the physician or the clinician being the last point. You
Yeah.
know, anything we do to help the clinician, have more information, is valuable, I think. I like the business of healthcare is ripe for disruption. We've all, for example, like insurance companies have been using AI to auto deny. Hey, yep, you got a
Yeah.
net here. We're going to deny, and then they just kind of put so much work on you that so talk about like pajama time. We talked to oncologists. One of my venture things. You know, they have 20, 30 patients at a time. And then when they get denied because they're using some drug for some weird thing that's off label, but it's probably pretty good because research paper X said, showed some promise. How do you explain that to the insurance company when it's not on any decision tree? It's a tertiary thing at best. And then they have to pick the 1 out of 20 they're going to advocate for in their 1 hour pajama time that they can do research, stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
maybe talk about what that's like as a clinician.
So I will tell you, and again, I'm going to put my entrepreneur hat on and investor hat on. So in the compendium of things that I get to do, I get to be an entrepreneur in residence for, a lot of VC firms and IB firms. And also I go out and invest on my own as well. Um, Now I'm going to put those two hats on. And one of the areas that healthcare is fundamentally different than many other sectors is that the end user is not the buyer. And I'll give you a great example. Okay. Uh, Cardiac stents. You go in, you've got a coronary blockage. You're the end user, and the doctor decides which stent to put into you. But even the doctor, who's not the end user, isn't the buyer of the stent. So
Mhm.
those steps removes the economic buyer from the end user. And, the further away you go, the less you kind of care about what the end user experience may be, right?
Mhm.
Um, so healthcare is one of those sectors fraught with that disability where many investors and quite frankly entrepreneurs themselves don't understand this problem of who's my customer, who's the end user, and conflating the two.
It's super complex, right? And then it's like the old Milton, I think it's Milton Friedman, one of the economists, you know, it's like there's like a layer of like, if I'm spending my money, it's like, I am going to scrutinize the heck out of that. If I'm spending your money, you know, I'm going to be less concerned, but I'm going to hear about it. If we're both, buying and selling with somebody else's money that somebody else pays for,
It
like
doesn't
nobody
matter.
cares, right? And then that's government. How do, how does
That
this all resolve?
complexity actually leads to probably fat in the system that can be cut out. And that's where I actually do see, that reversion to the mean from 18% to 10% of our GDP, which represents, by the way, trillions, right? With a T in
That's crazy.
It's amazing to me. And that's why in 2018, I was like, hey, I'm seeing the writing on the wall, the reckoning. Like, there's going to be a time when healthcare as we know it is catalyzed. Um, and I can't tell if we're kind of like travel agents in 1990 or 1996, but 2000 came along and travel agents just didn't exist anymore.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So, you talk about there's like trillions of dollars, and doctors are busier than they've ever been, broker than they've ever been, not making as much.
Sure.
Patients are like, you know, tearing their hair out because I don't know how to pay for this, and lots of bankruptcies. Hospitals are all broke apparently, and then like, there's trillions of dollars. Where
Sure.
did it go? Like, and then how do we kind of squeeze? Something's gotten squeezed the wrong way. How do we squeeze it back the other way? Or what's got to change, or where's the kind of roadblock here?
So I think what healthcare has done, and pun definitely intended, which is we've just put band-aid after band-aid and hope that the dam doesn't break. That's it.
Okay. Well, that's not good.
And what's that?
That's not good, right?
It's not good at all. And so I'm going to talk as a surgeon. Sometimes you just need to buck up. You need to put some stitches in, and that's the only way you're going to stop the bleeding. And so up until now, those band-aids have kind of worked, and at some point that dam is going to break. I don't know what will be the, powder cake that goes off, but I do think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And before, people in the US, we were just throwing money at the problem. Uh, Now there's no political will to throw money at the problem. I am a physician. I also have health insurance, and I've navigated it for my family, and I don't understand it. And if I'm in the system and I don't understand it, then something's gone wrong. So there probably is there are probably a few ways that changes are going to be impacted. One is different business models. So you're already starting to see little bits of this with either concierge medicine or direct to consumer medicine. A subscription that lets you go see your doctor, and the doctor only has, you're cutting the insurance, the pharmacy benefits provider, everyone out of the loop. So that's one. So that's a different kind of business model. And I will say,
Well,
sorry.
slow down. Explain that one. So is that like you'd pay dues to an urgent care facility? They
Yeah,
tackle the boo
you pay
boos and the sprains and
exactly. So you pay $99 a month, let's say, to a family practice provider or a generalist. You are allocated 2 healthy visits. You get any sick visit is at a lower rate of, let's say, $59. And then pricing changes, and there's all different models to it. And included is also one set of yearly labs. And for example, if you break your foot, many times you can actually just get the x-ray done separate, from the radiologist and everything like that. And he can, the provider can very quickly tell if you have a fracture or not, because there's an interpretation that's right there. And so you're intermediating and decoupling the entire customer journey.
so you're buying
And
from
so
the
that can
provider and you're the payer in this cash, and that's easy, right?
exactly. And
Okay.
so what's happening is, all the little pieces in the puzzle and the transactional costs are just taken out. So, and I'll be honest, there are actually bigger companies that are doing this too. And the example I'll give you is CVS. Okay. CVS went out and bought the pharmacy benefits provider. Okay. Then they went out and bought Aetna. So now, what do you characterize that? Is that a retailer? Is that a pharmacy? Or is that an insurance? And I would humbly submit to you that that's actually a healthcare delivery system, right?
Yeah. Well, is that better or worse? You know,
Well, so that's just a different business model. I don't know if the goal is to cut costs, then they have the opportunity to do that. So those transactional costs that were occurring at each layer are going down. Is that going to affect outcomes? Again, I don't know. And this has just happened in the last couple of years. And healthcare is one of those things that is a long tail phenomenon. You're not going to see the results of what you've done until 15, 20, 30 years down the line.
mhm. So, where do you see innovation, or like if there's a young entrepreneurs wanting to help healthcare, like where would you point them right now? Where's the fertile ground for new business innovation?
So, what I have been investing in and advising in, I do a lot of advising, both, for equity and as well as for, just helping new college
Hmm.
students. That's one of my
Yeah.
core missions. I love helping new, students and new entrepreneurs think about things a little bit differently. One is trying to de-skill things that cuts out providers from the group, from the journey. So for example, there was a company that I continue to advise. I met them through a university project that you and I had worked on together. and it was a cervical cancer screening tool meant to be done
Oh, yeah.
at home.
Mhm.
They recently, so we worked with them. I think you were the judge for that
Yeah.
team.
Gorgina, I think is
Yep.
the name of that. Yeah. It's like Cologuard for pap smears or something.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that was last year. I've continued to mentor them. They won the Georgia Tech invention
Oh, cool.
prize. They're going to be going for the final round in a month or so. Now, I'm going to talk about them just as an example because in that scenario, when it's done at home, you don't need to go into your provider, right? You don't have to worry about that insurer payer problem. You just get it done, you send it back in, and there's a certain reagent cost, and the COGS are clearly well defined. And so someone without insurance can actually get that service. So that's one. Anytime you can disintermediate groups in that journey, that's one. The other is more entrenched positions, and you talked about it a little bit, where you have this huge compendium of data. And PubMed, as you'll remember, has only the statistically significant studies, but there's a
Okay.
whole iceberg of literature underneath which didn't get statistical significance, so it didn't make it out into the evidence-based papers. But if you were to crunch those numbers and think about, hey, we have these incomplete data sets, how can we make a change?
Okay.
That's a huge boon, because what previously wasn't powered to show a change will all of a sudden be able to show a change. I am working on a project through one of the incubators that I advise, and I'm leading it more like an entrepreneur in residence and helping this group, is a multi-omic drug discovery slash thinking about aging as a treatable condition, just like you would think about arthritis is a treatable condition. Can we make that happen with cell senescence, biomarkers, and such?
Oh, wow.
And you know what that relies on is getting access to data sets that haven't really been crunched well, that haven't been thought through, and looking directly at the pathways of, I don't want to get too into the weeds, of the mitochondrial damage or the cellular matrix, and the signaling pathways that occur, right? Those are huge data sets that are often incomplete, so it never goes to PubMed. But when you have a company that can be working on it, they can say, hey, Todd, you know what? We're with this algorithm of 5 or 6 biomarkers and some, assays. We can give you a actual score that is actionable. And here are the things that you need to do. And it can go all the way down to, GLP-1 efficacy. It can go out to what's your likelihood of a cardiovascular event, with what you're seeing. And so there are lots of problems that can probably be attacked. So that's tranche number 2. The third tranche is really leaning on digital heavy slash ubiquitous and real time changes. And I'll give you a really small example that's already out here is atrial fibrillation is well known. Health uses their Apple Watch that can figure out, oh, you're in atrial fibrillation right now. But if you think about it to the next step and saying, hey, you know what? I know Todd has these precursors, their genomic data is this. They're coming in with some chest pain. And actually, I don't think they're having a heart attack. It's probably just, gastric reflux, acid reflux,
Wow.
right? But
Yeah.
that's a real time evaluation that's occurring because, just as an example, it's taking the data that you've had on your watch, Fitbit, whatever, as you're walking into the hospital with near field communications. It's taking that back, making guesses. And that's where, the matrices, which are the underpinnings of generative AI, right? Because it's all tokenized and everything, Now you're looking at something very interesting where it can move you through the system really, really fast. So that's a huge problem, but I tell startups attack a very, very small piece of that whole problem.
So portable health records, it's a little creepy giving it all to Apple. Everybody hates, the big firms who shall not be named that have all the health records. I think that's right for disruption. If you can figure out a way, your phone just kind of goes, "Hey, here's Todd. Here's his, last, 2 years worth of interesting things." And you just plug it right in and go, and then you hand it right back to the patient. Why hasn't that really taken off? Do you think? I mean, that's a bureaucratic nightmare. Trying to connect up to all these systems. It seems like it should be easier or more open. Do you think you
I
see
think
any movement on that?
there are a couple of things that make it very difficult. One is the regulatory burden that's put on the companies to make sure it's HIPAA compliant, secure
Mm,
data, all these other things. Two, you're getting everyone trying to do a siloed version in a walled garden, right? Because from the company standpoint, that's what's best for the company because I want you to play in my garden, never leave, and that's it.
right.
Um, that's not necessarily the best thing for the user. You are seeing some jumps. So you're already starting to see people put, entire medical records or lab values in whatever, AI agent that they're using to say, tell me what's wrong. Tell me my diagnosis. What are the next steps? Now, this is where you get back to the hallucination problem. If you don't have someone in the loop that's watching, that is clearly um, ensconced in these issues, then all of a sudden that's when things can run amok and you get people getting very bad outcomes. And that may be what stops a lot of these companies from going forward within the health field.
So human in the loop. I think human in the loop's got to be there forever. Um,
100%. Someone at least checking or, is like, hey, does that pass the sniff test? Sometimes it doesn't pass the sniff test. One of my favorite academics to follow is Terrence Tao. I love math. And Terrence Tao is, arguably the best mathematician, for a while. He talks about how AI is just using probabilities to tell you what it thinks is the right answer, but will never admit that I don't know the answer. Right? He will never tell you.
yeah.
Oh,
Well, yeah.
it'll
It's
say,
goal seeking. It
I'm
seeks a
trying.
goal. There's going
Right.
to be an answer, right?
And it's just using probabilities to get to what it's getting to, which is what I'm doing as well at some basic level in my head. However, um, it's fundamentally different when looking at narcolepsy in all of humanity and saying, hey, what's a narcolepsy look like for this patient that's a trucker? Now, ChatGPT may or may not pick up on
Hmm.
that nuance, right? But my first thing is like, oh my God, like we definitely can't have a narcoleptic trucker. Like that's just not going to fly.
Right. Right.
No matter
Well, it
what
might
the
fly.
treatments are,
Yeah.
no matter what, the data shows on narcolepsy and drugs and whatnot, that's just not going to work. We're going to,
Right. We have concerns.
yeah.
Yeah. I was laughing. You're talking about all the papers. I think that's intriguing to go find all these old, underappreciated papers and collect them somewhere. And then, I was kind of giggling because, like, going back to your search days,
Yeah.
Gopher Holes is where those things would have been. And some, university professors, would amounts to a Dropbox.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you find all those? Or are you back in the search business
In
after
a
all these
very
years?
realistic way, we are. And many times we have to go to key opinion leaders and say, hey, look, we will have a bilateral sharing agreement, give us stuff, and we will let you get access to data in order to, because we're both in the business of empowering humanity and bringing human healthcare to the next level. And so if that's the goal, then like we will teach you what we learn, but you got to give us data also. So hey, let's get that. And so is it becoming a clearinghouse? I'm not sure. But where the company that I'm most recently and heavily involved in That's really the end goal, is trying to take disparate pieces, put them all together, find the patterns, figure out what's actionable, and then bring that back out.
Are you mentioned biomarkers just tangentially,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
HER2, like I'm fascinated with like HER2 is a breast cancer thing. Oh, by the way, it's also prostate or something else, and it like they can indicate that this one thing is a biomarker that showed up on one particular disease state that is applicable for a lot of things. And then are you able to like, is that a way forward? Right. I think it is. And then are we able to like go back? Is there a way to kind of go back to these old studies and go, oh, you know what? They were probably talking about HER2, or, we could probably impute biomarkers if they give us enough like hints, or is there a
Yeah,
way to do
so
that? Or,
I think there probably is. And again, I'm not a biostatistician, I'm not a data scientist, but I think that's probably what's missing. If you were to go back 30, 40 years, you'll often find papers saying, we don't understand the pathogenesis of why this is occurring, but this is occurring. And,
3 out of 6
we know
patients.
that
Yeah.
this causes this. Like, we don't understand the full mechanism and the pathway of it.
Hmm.
The problem with that is that when you don't understand the full pathway, you're treating something which probably has knock-on effects. So, for example, Vioxx was a great example of, yeah, it treats the pathway, but it also causes bleeding, which is also related to the same pathway of pain inhibition.
Okay.
Like, that's why it got pulled off the market, just as an example. We are readily willing to take as a population, oh, this anticoagulant works for 85%, but we don't know which 15% it doesn't work for. And we don't quite understand why. So getting down to those singular pathway systems, the smaller you can bring it down, the better it becomes. And likely that's where the next passage, if we're going to go past this plateau, that's where it's going to be. So when you say, hey, what was 30 or 40 years ago, it's more likely going to be, well, yeah, now we kind of understand why that's occurring, and this is what was occurring, and all the other crud around it is going to be swept away.
Okay. And then is there like valuable data that we can now pull forward because of stuff like that?
Yeah, because again, that's in the record, so to speak. So you have access to it. You probably have incomplete data sets that you can probably pull forward and say, oh, this is what those expert opinions said. Oh, now it kind of makes sense. And so if this is really true, that axiom is now true and proven true. Now you can go and, uh, you know, prove other things that are happening.
Interesting field of research. Um, I want to kind of go back. What you were talking about your old company with the search engine. And I think you had a kind of interesting outcome there. Not 100% positive, right? So what happened to that company?
Yes. Um, One of the things that I tell people all the time, even in investors as well as founders, is, hey, focus on failures. I think a lot of people focus on winning. Now, when we got our company, let me kind of go through the arc of NetGopher just so you get an idea. We recognized that we couldn't really make money as a search engine. We tried, it doesn't work. We had to really dig deep and say, what is it that we're providing? And what we're providing is the right information at the right time. Like, ultimately, that's what a search engine is doing. But then we transitioned it into enterprise software. And we were doing something called dynamic predictive caching. So again, at that time, video was a huge constraint. And so if we could prefetch data and bring it onto the internet, that was a huge boon for the enterprises. That's fundamentally the same thing that we were doing before, except now we're doing it from a different customer. That being said, so we did our raise, we went forward, we grew our headcount, and ultimately, one, I was a biology guy, and you become less and less of a value add. I mean, I'm a great chief cheerleader, which is what I ended up becoming, but then it's time for me to step away. We realized that. I recognized that, hey, this is what's right for the company. So we did a reverse takeover. Um, I still held the lion's share of the stock in the new company. And, I really sat for like 2 or 3 months. Didn't do anything for that summer except eat Lucky Charms and watch Price is Right. And then I decided to go back to medical school. About
Okay.
8 months after that, the writing was clearly on the wall where there's a liquidity crunch. We were not going to get to the next round or make it to the next level. We still had money in the bank, and we had a come hither talk with the investors amongst all the employees, and we decided to do chapter 7, and I'm really, really proud of that, actually. So one option is we already have money in the bank. We're under no obligation to give it back. But if you do something called chapter 7, you can unwind it and say, hey, let's give money back to the creditors. The investors are creditors at some level, and we're going to give it back. We had some spirited discussions about it, and I knew it was the right thing to do because I thought about it as a fiduciary to my shareholders. That was where I needed to be. So nothing came of it, but what I did get was all of the learning. These are all things that you'll notice I never learned anywhere else before, and they were very formative. The second big part was one of our lead investors wrote a letter of intent that said, if Niral is attached to a company, I will invest $100,000. That's it.
Wow. Wow.
And
Did you ever cash that in?
no, I didn't,
Okay.
because I
Yeah.
went back to business or medical school. I wish you were still around. Maybe I, would use that
Yeah.
at
Right.
some point.
Right.
But that was a really, really big vote of confidence for me because I probably did the right thing. I recognize that in retrospect. And sometimes just thinking about things and saying, hey, what's going to be good for the world? I would liken it to organ donation, right? That company was going to die no matter what.
Mhm.
Why don't we give some of those organs, i.e., the money that we had, back to the investor so they could put it in something that was going to potentially change the world?
Right. Right.
And that's the way I
Yeah.
thought about it. And that's been a decision that's been great for me just from a mental standpoint.
Yeah. It's easy to sleep on. You said this isn't going to work. Let's just stop.
Let's stop. And even
salvage what we can. Yeah.
and for the employees, they would have gotten a few more months of, salaries, but they were really all talented. So they were able to go to another place and get jobs anyway. So it wasn't a problem.
Yeah. I bet you some of them had a great story on the outcome. I don't know if you've kept up with any of them, but that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
To see how
So
many of them.
actually, very quick aside, one of the folks that I worked with, he went and started his own thing within the telecom business, and so one of his early investors was Sky Dayton of Earthlink fame, which
Oh, wow.
and so actually, one of the folks that I worked with called me and said, "Hey, Noral, you should come join us, etc." And I was like, "No, let me think about it." And being a startup founder really is trying. It's just very taxing. And I was like, well, this is going further and further away from what I really love in healthcare, biology, life sciences, things like that. And so I said no. And actually, Sky Dayton called me and was like, hey, man, is something wrong with this company? Like, why aren't you joining? Like, tell me about it. And he was urging me to jump back in.
The gang's getting back together.
Yeah. And that happens a lot, as you know. And
Yeah.
you bet on the team. Many times you're betting on the team, and it's a team that worked well before. There were a variety of external reasons that it didn't work, and that's okay.
Yeah. And then better idea, different circumstances,
Right.
different year. Yeah. How awesome is that? So the team kept going. Everybody's buddies. You still
Yeah.
talk to your investors.
I still
Nope.
talk to them. I
Yeah.
I can look at them in the face. I know it was the right thing to do. But also you have that entrepreneurial spirit in you, and you don't have that sort of negative aura about you as you go forward, even for yourself. Right. And
Yeah.
so that's been really cool.
Yeah. Well, good on you for that. You said something earlier that I thought was interesting. You said being a CEO or a founder is like Neo in the Matrix. You want to kind of
Yeah.
explain that?
Sure. I think what I so that was the first company. I know we've taken the majority of time talking about that, but I've also worked on four other companies since then. Okay, in various roles and whatnot. Some are just straight, CEO, drop in CEO type things. Others are, hey, can you help with the strategy? Like they just need someone else to really kind of help guide this team. Um, what people get wrong is they think that it's about, pushing through some barrier. I would argue it's like being in Neo, where you're just dodging bullets. Remember that, scene? And those are existentially death nails that are going to be coming your way for the startup. And so you're better off thinking like Neo. How do I dodge this bullet? How do I dodge that bullet? There's a famous algebraist. His name was Carl Jacobi, and his line was invert, always invert. Um, I think founders think, oh, I need to take risks. I'm going to argue that the biggest risk you should take is saying, yes, I'm going to start this company and move out to California without any source of revenue, income, whatever. But then every subsequent thing that you do is try to de-risk it. You can de-risk it by getting patent protection. You can de-risk it by getting, network effects. You can get it de-risked. And so founders have it wrong where they're trying to run through something, but in fact, what you're doing is just dodging bullets left and right.
Be like water, Bruce Lee, right?
Yeah.
Go around it. Um, well, Niral, it's all about travel and getting out there in the world and making things happen. You got any great travel stories you want to share with us?
Yeah. So I just got back from Cambodia and Thailand. My favorite travel story, I was the course lead for trauma surgery on behalf of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative in Ukraine. And I will say, so we went to Moldova, then traveled into Ukraine via van.
Wow.
I do remember we were told, hide all your medical signage. There was a small undercarriage and things like that. And, there was a van that stopped on the other side. And I saw the two drivers kind of talk, and they looked like they were passing something. And in my head, I was like, "Am I being trafficked?" Because I feel like this is what being trafficked would feel like.
Oh God.
But it was all for our security. It was great. So that was my one time where I got to be like Jack Reacher, and it was awesome.
Okay. Yeah, that was during the war.
Yeah,
During
it was
the
in 2023.
no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Trauma
so
surgery.
I still love doing those humanitarian things. I just got back from India where I was helping with a vision group that was looking at doing some different things. And that would also combine they were thinking about creating micro entrepreneurs in small villages, which then uses a different part of my brain as well. So,
Oh, that's awesome. Is
yeah.
that a Thai thing or something else? TIE.
Yeah. So that's
Okay.
through Ty Atlanta and Paul Lopez, who we
Yeah.
both know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he got me involved. I'm always thankful to Ty. So I will, now that you've mentioned their name, it was a Thai member that was a lead investor in NetGopher. And that's the reason that anytime I'm a part of Thai Atlanta now, and if they need something, I always raise my hand.
Heck yeah.
Happy to volunteer back because they were so influential in my first go around that, now it's time for me to do the same for the next group.
Yeah, it's awesome. And do you want to tell a story about your wife's favorite Sky Lounge?
Yeah, so this is all about sky lounges. I don't know if you can see in the back, I'm an
Yeah.
aviation geek. That's
Okay.
actually a map with all the worldwide route maps for airlines. So my favorite sky lounge is the F Gates in the Atlanta concourse. I like it because there's a shower and an outdoor terrace where you can watch wide bodies if you're an aviation geek. My wife and I were going to Korea, um, and she's like, "Oh, let's just go to a restaurant and get something to eat before the flight." I was like, "Well, let's go to the lounge," and she'd never experienced a lounge before. She's like, "No, no, no! I want something really, good to eat." Get in there, her eyes pop open. She loved the food. She loved like what it was there. So we were in Korea and we were on a layover on the way back. And for 10 hours, instead of going into Korea like we had previously planned, she's like, I'm just going to stay in the lounge. I didn't realize lounges were like, and, so,
Oh man, yeah, that's
and
awesome.
you're like, girl, you were going to sit here for another 14 hours on a flight home. Are you sure you don't want to like go out and stretch your legs? She said, no, it's fine. Like, I have everything I want in this lounge. It was like a self-sufficient, place to, hang out for her.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, Niral, it's been awesome spending time with you today. If people
Thank you,
want to
Todd.
follow up with you after this on the internet, what's a great way to get in contact
So
with you?
LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. I don't have any other social media, but I'm always happy to chat with people that are energetic, smart, have integrity, and happy to help all stages. And I'm always happy to take coffee chats because most of the time I end up learning something new, even if I'm not going to be able to help. And that's always a really fun intellectual exercise.
I'm hanging out at Thai Atlanta tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow.
Every month,
All right. Well, it's been great having you, Niral.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks.
All
Bye
right,
for
have
now.
a great day.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.